Craving fresh, made-from-scratch Mexican food that actually tastes homemade? Cafe Rio's got you covered. Every tortilla is hand-rolled, every sauce is slow-simmered, and every bite is bursting with bold flavor. Hungry yet? Don't wait. Order now at CafeRio.com. Build your burrito, salad, or tacos exactly how you like them, and we'll have it ready hot, fresh, and fast. Whether it's lunch on the go, dinner with friends, or a full-on fiesta at home, Cafe Rio always brings the flavor and the fun. So what are you waiting for? We've got you covered. Savor the flavor and order now at CafeRio.com.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong, happy to be back with you for another day. Today we've got a nice little preview on the Utah-Texas Tech game, and we'll be joined by a special guest later on in this episode. So, we're gonna get into it. We're gonna talk a big game, and obviously there's a lot of implications with this. So we'll get into that. But first, let me tell you about our partners at Cafe Rio. Craving fresh, made-from-scratch Mexican food that actually tastes homemade? Cafe Rio's got you covered. Every tortilla is hand-rolled, every sauce is slow-simmered, and every bite is bursting with bold flavor. Hungry yet? Don't wait. Order now at CafeRio.com. Build your burrito, salad, or tacos exactly how you like them, and we'll have it ready, hot, fresh, and fast. We've got you covered. Savor the flavor and order now at CafeRio.com. All right, well, we're just going to jump right into it today. We're going to preview this Texas Tech game for Utah. Obviously, these two teams coming into this are ranked high. Utah coming in at 16th in the Associated Press, top 25, and Texas Tech at 17. So two teams that have a lot of expectations placed upon them. They've backed it up on the field with 3-0 records. And this is the first game of conference play. And I think there's equally the same amount of questions for both of these teams going into the season, knowing kind of the competition that they've played as well as kind of some of the expectations for them. And so, we're going to see what both of these teams are made of. I don't want to quite say, are they frauds? Are they great? We're going to find out. I think John Wilner wrote an article today for us at KSL.com talking about kind of what this is. And you look back at Utah last year at this time, and they were ranked highly in the AP Top 25, and they were playing an Oklahoma State team that was ranked highly. And you can see how that turned out for both of these teams. So, you never really know what to expect. It's the first game of the conference slate, and there's so much that can change here. Obviously, there's a lot more that went into Utah's season last year and kind of how that game, it changed after that game. But Utah's in a completely different spot here, and the expectation is that this team is good. But on the same page, the expectation is that Texas Tech is good. If you may not have known, Texas Tech last year finished the season with an 8-4 record. It was kind of in the Big 12 title race. It just, there was other teams that were a little bit better down the stretch, and the Red Raiders obviously didn't get to where they needed to. And so during the offseason, they pumped a ton of money into it. It's reportedly up to $25 million that was spent on this roster. This was before the House settlement, so that they could essentially pay anything that they wanted for these players in the NIL. And, a lot of money was spent to not even quite rebuild, but kind of add to the roster that they had. And so, for the success that they had last year, it's not like Texas Tech is starting from scratch and they suddenly brought in a bunch of new players to try to make a new team. They at least have a baseline, right? And I would say that 8-4 season is pretty much that baseline where, you had solid success, good but not great. And now through the transfer portal, by getting a lot of these players to come, the expectation is that this team should have more wins, right? And I think we've seen from the early games that this Texas Tech team can be pretty solid on both sides of the ball. And so we're going to get into that and kind of dive into that. But first, the biggest thing here is at the beginning of the year, the schedules aren't always created equal. And even throughout the end of the year, it's not fully created equal. But within conference play, you're at least playing similar teams. You're having similar experiences. And there's at least some similarities there that allow you to kind of understand how your team relates to, conference opponents. In this scenario, you have two teams that have played different conference schedule or non-conference schedules, and it's hard to get a bearing for where these teams are. Obviously, both have performed well. Their offenses are doing well. Their defenses are doing well, but it hasn't been a one-to-one comparison in that respect. And if you look at Utah, obviously UCLA was used as kind of the measuring stick to start the season because it's a Big Ten opponent. They were supposed to be improved with Nico Imaliava. Clearly that hasn't gone well for the Bruins, who have lost back-to-back games to Mountain West opponents, and they fired their head coach after 3 games. And so clearly there wasn't a same level there. Now, with that said, if you look at kind of the strength of schedule that Utah has, according to Massey, Utah is 84th, right? Whatever that means, we don't fully know. That's just kind of where they're at right now. If you look at Texas Tech, according to Massey, they're at 130th. So you can complain about Utah's non-conference schedule and it not really showing anything for the Utes, but Texas Tech has an even more diluted or non-conference schedule, and so it's tough to be able to extrapolate kind of where these two teams are. Obviously, the stats are going to look good for both of these teams. Texas Tech played Arkansas Pine Bluff, and if you're looking off of rankings in terms of where teams are at, Arkansas Pine Bluff is essentially ranked 125th in FCS, not FBS, FCS. And so they're one of the worst teams in FCS. And then you have Kent State, which is almost one of the worst teams in FBS at 135th. And then you have Oregon State, which was 102nd in FBS. So 3 teams that just, they're not going to move the needle in terms of how you can measure this Texas Tech team. The reality is, though, is this team is solid, right? Like I think the fact that, and this applies to Utah as well, the fact that you're blowing out lesser competition shows that you have the talent, right? But it can be kind of a fool's errand to kind of say that this is going to be a predictor of how things are going to go this season. So, it's interesting, and I'm going to read a few advanced stats. I guess we're calling them those now. We're gonna kind of dive into that a little bit to kind of see how these two teams are, because there's not a lot of comparisons, and so you basically just have to go with what's on the field. And as I said, we're going to get more as this season develops, especially this week. So jumping into some of those advanced metrics, there's some things that I love to look at. I'm a big numbers guy. I may not present that a ton out there. Maybe I do. I'm not entirely sure. But I have a bunch of spreadsheets that track a lot of this information. I try to be on top of it. I feel like in the stats world, there's always something that you can attach yourself to each week. And so there may be one week where I'm looking at one thing and another stat. And so, it's easy to have a wandering eye and see different things, and people pick up different things. So by no means is this going to be a easy thing to be able to say which team is better. But just kind of looking at some of the standard things within this that kind of help paint the picture of what this team can be. And so looking first for me is the success rate. Success rate is basically a look at how a play is developed, right? So essentially, if you score a touchdown on a play, that's obviously considered a successful play. You scored. That's what it is. There's other metrics that go into that. So anybody that has followed this before, you have a good understanding of what it is. But for those that don't, essentially what it is on first down, if you can gain at least half of the yards, then that is considered a successful play. So if it's 1st and 10, that's picking up 5 yards. Pretty simple. The next part of that equation is gaining 70% of the yards on 2nd down. That's obviously going to vary. You don't have fully understanding what that could be. That could be 2-3 yards. That could be 10 yards. You don't really know. It's really just dependent on the down and distance in that situation. But 70% of those yards, if you pick that up, that would be considered a successful play. And then lastly, on 3rd and 4th down, it seems pretty apparent that picking up 100% of the yards needed would count as a successful play. And so measuring that throughout the season, it kind of shows how effective a team can be. Right now, Utah is at essentially a 60.7% success rate. You're completing that at a high rate. You're doing what you need to in most of your downs, and so you're doing really well. Texas Tech is not much far behind them at 58.2. So these two offenses have been doing really well with what they have. And if I had more time, I would look at how that compares to the rest of the country. I didn't get all my numbers in there in time to be able to do this preview, but those are both going to be pretty high in the country. And you have to expect that considering the opponents that these two teams have played. And so you've got two teams that have been efficient with what they've got, and I think more than anything that shows that they're not taking steps back based on their competition, right? They're doing what they need to. They're executing at a high level, and being effective there. Now, when you look on the defensive side of the ball with the success rate, how are they limiting them? So Utah's defense is at 31.9%. Allowing opponents essentially 31.9% of their success, whereas Texas Tech is at 25.4%, so just a tiny bit better. But both of these teams are pretty well locked in. We've talked to the coaching staff up at Utah, and they've said that they want to be a little bit more effective on the defensive side of the ball, despite being really effective. And so I think these are the numbers that they would love to be around, so it's not anything to knock at. If you can stop your, 75% of the time the opposing team getting what they need to on their plays, you're most likely going to be effective. So there's that. Moving on to stuff rate. This one's also an interesting one, and this one's just looking at a percentage of basically the rushing plays being stopped at essentially the line of scrimmage or behind the line of scrimmage, and being effective that way. So sometimes these are TFLs, tackles for loss. It could be sacks. It could be, whatever it may be in that scenario. But it's looking at all those rushing plays and how effective you've been. So for Utah, their stuff rate, looking at the offensive side of the ball, they've only been stuffed on 11.1% of their plays. Not bad. Texas Tech, 19.2%. So a little bit higher. Teams have been able to be a little bit better at stopping their run game. One note on Texas Tech's run game: they lost their starting running back in fall camp. Transfer running back coming in was expected to be the star and the guy, and so I think some of that is still Tech trying to figure out who they are in the run game. If there is a weakness, this is probably where it's at. But saying it's a weakness is not necessarily meaning that it's a bad thing. It's just compared to everything else, like the passing game and maybe how they perform on the defense. This is kind of where Tech is a little bit more behind. So just less than double what Utah is, but that shows opportunities for opposing teams where if the ground game isn't effective, that can be dangerous at times. Now, looking on the defensive side, Utah has stopped teams 29.2% of the time on those, and Texas Tech at 25.6%. So once again, pretty similar things. Sorry if this is boring you. I'm just trying to give you a perspective in a different way of how these two teams match up. And they're going to be pretty close, quite honestly. That's not always the case in these games, but you've got two teams that are being really efficient on both sides of the ball. And so they're going to be pretty similar. And so there's not going to be too much of an edge here. Now, looking at line yards. So this is where kind of the rushing yards, so we're taking it from a different perspective, how much of that is attributed to the offensive line. And there's different weighted measures for it to kind of attribute that. Usually, if it's a loss, tackle behind the line of scrimmage, a lot of that will be attributed to the offensive line simply for allowing that to happen, right? Guys obviously got into the backfield, and so that's going to be a much bigger weighted punishment on the offensive line for allowing that. Now, that's not always an easy stat to look at because there are some situations where things don't go right, and it's not necessarily the offensive line, but by and large, that's kind of how it's looked at. Then there's, 0 to 4 yards is kind of the standard, I would say, of where offensive line can go. If you can get 0 to 4 yards, a lot of that is generally attributed to just your standard offensive line push. If they can get that, that means that they've been doing a good job, and they've done really well. Anything over 5 yards, a lot of that is still on the offensive line, but it is a lot credited as well to the running back. And then 11 plus yards, you still get a ton of credit for the offensive line, but then that running back kind of factors into that, or whomever is running the ball factors into that. So that's just kind of the weighted balance of that and how they judge these. All that goes to say is Utah is averaging about 3.8 line yards. So you're getting an offensive line that is being incredibly effective. You're essentially saying that about every 4 yards, the offensive line is giving you that. And then anything after that is gravy for a running back. Or in Utah's case, it could be a tight end, it could be a quarterback, it could be anybody. But this offensive line is doing very well at creating enough push for their offense to be effective. And if you can you go back to those the success rate plays, if you can get half of your distance on every run, you're going to be effective. And that obviously plays into Utah's strong run game, and so that helps in all those factors. But this is a great metric for Utah and exactly where you'd want to be able to have success in a run game. Texas Tech, in comparison, is just at 2.8 yards, so a full yard behind. They're getting pushed, but not to that same level. Granted, this Texas Tech team is much more inclined to pass the ball, and so it's not quite the same, but you're still, you still have to factor those things in there. And so it's an important metric to look at. How is the offensive line performing? There's not a lot of easy ways to evaluate an offensive line, and this is one of the best. And so it's just kind of looking at kind of what this means. Everybody expects this offensive line for Utah to generate a lot, but can they do it against a better opponent? And that's where it's going to factor in. So I'm curious to see these numbers, on an individual game basis. After this game, how does Utah match up with Texas Tech's defensive line, which is this heralded line as well? And how do these two go after each other? So there's that. And then lastly, with these kind of advanced metrics, looking at havoc plays. And so you can have havoc plays on both sides of the ball. We generally refer to this as a defensive stat. Are they creating havoc, right? And so in kind of how this is reported, usually it stands for a tackle for loss. That could include a sack, forced fumbles, interceptions, or a pass breakup, right? So anything that really creates, quote unquote, that havoc will be counted by most people who track these things. Just as a side note, Utah internally only counts sacks or takeaways. They don't care about the tackles for loss, essentially. They're more looking at the sacks, did that break up the play, and then takeaways. So those forced fumbles, the interceptions, they don't even count the pass breakups in that scenario. So when you're looking at havoc plays, that's essentially based on your front seven, essentially, and what they're able to do. And so from Utah's perspective, Utah has had a havoc on 17.5% of plays. Not a bad stat by any means. Utah wants to be improved in that, but it's a good measuring stick of what they've been able to do. Their front seven, when you look at it from that collective, it's down to 10.2%, so a little lower, but not a bad measuring stick at all for this Utah team. But when you look at Texas Tech, their defense has been generating a little bit more havoc. Once again, remember their opponents, and so it's probably pretty equal. They're at 20%, so it's not like it's that much higher. But on 20% of the plays, they're essentially creating a havoc. So that's recording a tackle for loss or a turnover or a pass breakup, that kind of stuff. Their front seven is at 11.9, so almost 2% points higher than Utah's. But these two teams are essentially neck and neck right here. Offensively, Utah's actually done a little bit better at allowing havoc plays. And so what I mean there is on only 8% of plays, Utah has allowed a havoc play to happen. So a tackle for loss, that kind of thing. Texas Tech's offense is at 10.1. So still pretty similar, but that's one that I'd look at too, where given Texas Tech's opponents, the fact that opponents were able to create havoc plays, a little bit more than what Utah's has, kind of shows maybe there are some vulnerabilities, right? Like we're nitpicking here. There's a lot that goes into this, but both of these teams are pretty solid. And then in the defensive backfield, similarly, looking at this is when a pass is broken up or an interception. Utah's at 7.2% of plays, and Texas Tech is at 8.1%. So That's just some of the advanced stats. I'll try to mix these up depending on the game and kind of what's going on. Let me know if you actually like these things. I'm happy to skip over them, but it's sometimes easier, especially in these weeks when the opponents are different, to kind of just get an idea of where they're at. There's still not a one-to-one comparison. As I mentioned, these opponents are completely different, and so you can have one game that really changes the value of that. But it's more than just looking at, okay, he threw up 600 yards. It's more based on how did they get there, right? It's easy to look at a stat box and say he ran, he picked up 600 yards, but they didn't move the ball that well. Now, granted, that's probably not a scenario that's going to happen. That's much more similar down in, let's say, the total offense was 300. How did they move that? Was it effective, or was it just, continually slamming your head in the wall and, it took forever to get there? That's where it probably matters more. But in a game like this, it's going to be a little bit different. So, really fascinated to kind of see how that goes, but we'll continue to do that if you're interested. So if you don't, tell me I'm, shove my stats up, tell me to not say that stuff, and happy to transition from those. But I think they're interesting, so I'm going to keep doing it until you tell me otherwise. Kind of real quick before we get into the interview, I want to tell you a little bit about some of their players. So Baron Morton, he's their quarterback, veteran guy back there. He's completing 70% of his passes this year. He's thrown for 923 yards, averaging about 11 yards per completion, has 11 touchdowns and 1 interception already, and is averaging 307 yards per game. So that's near the top of the country. If you look at a lot of the team stats, this offense for Texas Tech is going to be near the top or at the top of many of these statistical categories. And so it's a team that's being incredibly efficient. They're putting up a lot of yardage, and they're obviously decisively beating their opponents. And so, you're going to have that. But with that said, Morton is not like a Devin Dampier. And I what I mean in that regard is he is much more of a pocket passer. He's going to stay in that pocket. He's going to live or die there, and he's been very effective there. So on the season this year, he's only got -5 rushing yards on 6 attempts. So clearly there's just not a lot that they have to worry about that. This isn't a mobile quarterback that Utah is going to have to scheme up against. If they can keep, their assignments and stay assignment sound, there's potential that Utah can do well at getting to Morton. But he's effective. He gets the ball out quickly, and is somebody that you have to absolutely respect in the passing game because he's got guys that are able to do it. But looking real quick at the kind of the PFF grades here, this is just another evaluation of how a player can be effective. The numbers themselves don't fully mean anything. It's more of just a grade. But you can get a clear picture of what needs to happen for Utah. So, for example, this year, and I'll look at last year as well because it's more of a complete picture. But this year, when the pocket is clean, so essentially you haven't put a lot of pressure or much pressure at all on Morton, his grade is a 91.6. He's very effective. Those are generally considered elite grades. That's pretty high. He's effective. You don't want him to have a clean pocket. That drastically changes when under pressure. And don't get me wrong, every single quarterback in the country, at least most that I've ever seen, are going to be different, right? Under pressure, they're going to be completely different. There's very, very, very few QBs that can have similar or even higher, I doubt higher, numbers or grades when under pressure. It's just, it clearly makes sense. You're under pressure and you're speeding things up. You're not able to go through your progressions as well, and so things change. Some of the better quarterbacks are able to have a closer, I'm blanking on the word there that I need here, but a closer separation between their grades here. But Morton is clear. As I said, 91.6 grade when kept clean this year. Under pressure, he's been a 38.4. Basically saying you put pressure on him and he's not going to make great decisions. At least that's a very oversimplified version of it. But, if Morgan Scalley is able to dial up some pressure, they've won essentially. I'm not saying won the game, but they've won those individual plays. His grading essentially is about the same when blitzed versus not blitzed. So it's not necessarily a blitz thing. It's more just putting him under pressure, putting him under duress, making him think in a quick manner before he can get the ball out. And so if they can do that, they're going to be much more successful just from a numbers perspective, from his historical perspective of being able to beat Morton. Looking back at last year, those numbers are pretty similar. So in the pocket, if he was kept clean, there was no pressure, his grade was a 90.2. Under pressure, it was a 40. So that's pretty similar to what it is last year as it is to this year. And, really curious to see what Utah's able to do there. The ideal thing here for Utah is if they can rush their four guys, rush four and put pressure on that way, that sets up Utah to be so much more successful in the secondary. Then they don't have to worry as much. That's not to say that there isn't some worry, but they don't have to be as worried about getting beat in the secondary. These receivers are still incredibly talented. They've gone to the portal to be able to get guys that could be much more effective than what they had last year for Morton. And so far, this early stretch is they've proved it. And so Utah's the biggest point here is you've got to get pressure on Morton. But with that, you've got to stay assignment sound. You can't over pursue. Not that he's going to beat you with his legs, but you can't give him a second to be able to get the ball off, right? You've got to get to him as fast as you can, put him under duress, and things change. And if you put him in duress, he's already thrown an interception this year. Not that, that foretells anything, but if you can put him under pressure, that generally speeds up the motion, and he hasn't been as effective. Looking at some of the other players, he hasn't been the most producing in the run game, but Jacoby Williams is a guy that they're really high on. He grades out as one of the top players on the team. He's still young, still trying to get there. His effectiveness is essentially off the right edge. He likes to run the ball that way, and so you're going to see a lot of scheming to try to prevent him. But I don't think that they're as worried about the run as they are about the passing game. And so, if this team is able to have success running the ball, then I think Utah's in a different situation, in a world of, I don't want to call it a world of hurt, but I think it's not advantageous to Utah if Texas Tech is able to run the ball efficiently, because then they have to change their assignments, and that's when you start getting beat. And with that said, the top two guys for this Texas Tech team are Coy Aiken, wide receiver. He leads the team with 229 yards, 3 touchdowns. He's averaging 20.8 yards per catch. Really, grading out high. He actually grades the highest in his deep and medium catches. So 10 to 20 yards. He grades incredibly high. So he's effective. He's been efficient. Anything shorter, he's not the guy that you're necessarily going to go to, because they haven't been as effective with him, but they've got other guys to do that. And that leads me to tight end Terrence Carter Jr., who is the second leading receiver with 194 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he's also averaging close to that 20 at 19.4. He grades pretty high. He can be a threat in the deep game. He has a high grade there and has been efficient there, but he's going to be much more behind the line of scrimmage, short yardage passes, and being effective there. And that's where he's going to, make the money there. So you've got those two as just a combination alone. There's some other guys that you can focus in on, but these two together are going to create quite the mismatch for Utah. They've got to be assignment sound. They have to have the right eyes, as Kyle Whittingham talked about, to be able to keep on their guys, not get beat, be in the right position to tackle. And if the defense can do that, this simplifies everything. If the defense can do that, obviously they win. No. If they can do that, I think they have a much better chance to be able to stop this Texas Tech team. They're going to get some shots, right? Like on Saturday, you're going to see some times where Morton just beats Utah. And I don't think that's an indictment entirely on Utah. That's just the nature of the game and who Morton is and his effectiveness. It's more just limiting those, right? If Utah can limit those and not have this progressive, onslaught of passing, not quite an air raid style, but it's kind of closer to that. If you cannot get beat that way, this Utah team is going to be in a much better situation, assuming that their offense is able to do similarly, and be effective. So, we'll see. The defense, I think the biggest talking point for this team is on their defensive line. They went and got a bunch of guys that are effective. David Bailey came from Stanford. He was one of the best edge guys in the country, and he's been effective for this Tech team, and will continue to factor into that. And then another edge player is Romello Height. He's been incredibly solid. He's been the best team our best player on the team in terms of PFF grades. His pass rush is incredibly effective, and just overall solid player. And so you've got to be efficient, right? Devin Dampier is going to have to be efficient to be able to make this happen. He does have obviously two great tackles to be able to help him, but this is where we're going to see if Utah's offensive line is really up to the level that everybody expects them to be. There's been a lot of conversations about this offensive line being one of the best in the country. This is probably the best test you're going to get all season in terms of the opposing defense and the defensive line. And so if you can handle that, if Utah's offensive line can manage that and keep Devin Dampier upright, allow him to be able to work the way that they have been, this is going to be a great opportunity for Utah. So for me, it really comes down to trench play. There's obviously a lot of factors that go into it, right? Like the secondary for Utah has to be effective. They've got to be able to limit those big plays, but I think it all starts in the trenches. You could say that in many games, but I think in this one in particular, the team that is able to win in the trenches is going to have a much higher likelihood of winning this game. You still have to complete your passes. You still have to be effective in the ground game. You still have to do all those right things, but if you can get that advantage there, that's going to mean a lot more, right? I think the biggest thing here is that from looking at a Utah perspective, everybody wants to see Devin Dampier pass the ball. And I'm not saying that that's not important, and I think he will have to pass the ball a little bit more in this game, but I don't know that that has to be their identity. If Utah can still have success against Tech running the ball, there's no reason to go away from that, right? Don't try to reinvent something to change who you are when what you've got works, right? So I wouldn't be surprised to see Utah maybe potentially stay with that ground game. I also wouldn't be surprised to see Utah take their shots early on just to try to show, hey, Tech, we got this, and then you can start going back into some of those things. So really fascinated to see how this game is schemed up from an offensive perspective. The defense obviously has to be sound in what they do, but I'm really fascinated by the offensive side of the ball here and what they're able to do. Are they going to try to be a little bit more risky for Dampier and allow him to make reads that may put him in a chance to get a turnover? Is he going to include his wide receivers a little bit more? That's really going to be the fascinating story to me. And if he's able to do that, if Utah gets a win, I think the sky's the limit for this team. Not to say that a team can't trip them up along the way, but I think if you can get past a Texas Tech team, I think that gives you a lot of confidence for the season. You start believing in yourself a little bit more, maybe more than you even do right now. These are those big games. You're doing it on Fox. You're doing it in a way that is a big time. So, that's going to be really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to it. So, before we move on to the next portion where I bring on a special guest, I'm going to tell you about our partners at Canyon View Credit Union. At Canyon View Credit Union, it's on the house. Close a mortgage and get a free appraisal up to $600. To learn more details or apply, visit canyonviewcu.com. All right, joining me today is Don Williams. He's a beat writer for the Texas Tech Red Raiders from the Lubbock Avalanche Journal. He's been covering this team for quite a while, and we're excited to have him. Don, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Appreciate the invitation to talk a little football.
Yeah, I'm excited for this. I think it's obviously a big matchup that many people are talking about. Two teams that have definitely shown up well to start the season. Obviously, the competition hasn't been as great for either one of these teams, but you've got two teams that are expected to compete for the Big 12 championship, and so we got a lot of fun on the docket for this weekend. So, with that being said, you've covered this team for quite a while. What would you say has been the biggest difference about this team so far? I know we're only 3 games in, but what would you say has been the biggest difference?
Biggest difference so far is just as you mentioned, I've covered Texas Tech football for a long time. I would say it's probably the most physically talented roster that they have had since the late Mike Leach years. I mean, kind of a big year for Texas Tech, and that most people remember is the season in 2008 where they had Graham Harrell and Michael Crabtree. That team started 10-0, reached number 2 in the national rankings, finished 11-2, and it was much more than just Harrell and Crabtree. That team also had a great offensive line, that had, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, 3 guys that played multi years in the NFL, and they had a lot of talent on the defense, particularly in the defensive front. That was 17 years ago, and I feel like pretty much without question, I think this is the most talented roster that they have had since. And I guess if you want to say the single biggest difference is their defensive line has just been really dominant. And again, you couch that by saying, well, they haven't played anybody. Arkansas, Pine Bluff. Now I forgot the second team, Kent State and Oregon State. And I thought Oregon State would be better than they were. They had some guys who put up numbers last year, but Tech just overwhelmed Oregon State too. But I think it's kind of borne out. And again, you might say, okay, they haven't played anybody, so how do you know how talented they are? Well, they're expecting a whole lot of scouts to be in Salt Lake City on Saturday, and part of the reason Salt Lake City, or pardon me, the Utes have the great offensive tackle, and I'm sure that you could tell me that they have more than just those couple of great bookend offensive tackles, but the scouts like David Bailey, who played at Stanford last year, and Romello Height, who's kind of bounced around. He was at Auburn, he was at Southern Cal. Last year he was at Georgia Tech. The puzzling thing to me with Romello Height was you look at his stats and coming in, he's a defensive edge rusher. And you look at his stats and coming into this year, he had 6.5 career sacks in 36 games. I mean, you do the math, that's an average of 2 sacks a season. So you look at this guy and you're like, why has he not been more productive? And I think that's kind of what people have been asking, because he's a great eyeball test, pass the eyeball test guy. I mean, he's 6'3", 235 or 40 pounds, and his get off and first step is really impressive. And we've seen that in these first 3 weeks. He and Bailey have pretty much identical numbers, but each of them have 2.5 sacks, and one has, I think, 6 quarterback hurries and one has 5 quarterback hurries. And it's very apparent, just watching them, it's like, wow, these guys are different. And then on top of that, they have both of those guys were transfers, and then their 2 defensive tackles were transfers. Lee Hunter, a big guy who came from UCF, who was second team All Big 12 last year, and a young man named Skylar Gill Howard, who played at Northern Illinois, and he had 52 tackles and 5 sacks last year, which is really productive for a defensive tackle. So they have defensive linemen who are starters last year, who are backups now, who are just rotation guys now. So when you're in that situation, you're in a good situation when the guys who started for you last year are guys who are rotating in this year.
Obviously, there's been a lot of conversation about the money that has been pumped into the Texas Tech program. It's not even just football. It's obviously a lot of other things, softball, whatever it may be. Do you feel like that has been a distraction for this, or has it been something that has been fully embraced and now it's, 3 games into the season, that's not really part of the conversation anymore? Or is it still kind of one of those things where they need to prove it, right? Obviously they're doing well, but what would mean that they, quote unquote, buying players isn't working?
To answer the last question first, what would mean buying players isn't working? I think it would be if this team doesn't win at least 9 games. That would kind of be the baseline. I mean, I think the Vegas number on their over-under at the start of the year was 8.5 wins. And I think there's a faction of Texas Tech fans who would say this season is a failure if they don't at least make the Big 12 championship game. And some people would say, well, with all this money that they spent, the roster that they have, this season will be a failure if they don't win the Big 12 championship and make the college football playoffs. I think those are valid points. I don't think it's been a distraction so far. Again, this team hasn't really faced any adversity. So there hasn't. You haven't had that. Okay, they lost a game, or maybe they lost a couple of games back to back, and then it's their finger pointing or that sort of thing. Right now, everybody is talking about how happy they are and getting along, and how much they love it here. Because you have guys that are, they're making several $100,000, in some cases over $1 million. And they say that, hey, I would have come here regardless of the money, just because I got here, and the facility they have here is fantastic. And I mean, as a guy who's covered a lot of college football for a long time, and seen a lot of facilities, that they're the price tag on what they've built is $242 million just for the South End Zone building, and for their what they call the Dustin R. Womble football facility. Um, that it's that has everything. I mean, it has everything you can possibly think of, and stuff that you wouldn't even think of. And it's all of these buildings, the South End Zone and the football facility and their indoor training center, which is connected to the indoor track that they have here. All of these are connected by Sky Bridge. In other words, you can walk into a door and never go back outside again and see and go walk into all these different facilities I've just described. So it's pretty impressive, and that's, again, some of these guys who came in here, I think, with the attraction of you can make a lot of money here. They got here and it's like, wow, these facilities are better than anything I've seen as well. I would have come here even if I wasn't making a whole lot of money. Now, again, the cynic says, well, sure, yeah, easy to say when you're making $750,000, but I guess to tie it back to what you originally asked, is it a distraction? I don't think it's a distraction yet. Does it have the potential to be? Yeah, sure, it has the potential to be if this season doesn't go as expected.
Online you're going to get some crazy things with fans, and I've seen a lot of Texas Tech fans that are pretty confident going into this game. But internally, what would you say is kind of how this team is viewing this game on Saturday?
I think there's a lot of internal belief and confidence. I think I definitely don't think they are looking past Utah. I definitely don't think they are, I don't know, high and mighty. Because I think, and I know it's the case with me. I think it's the case across college football. It's like, what happened to Utah last year? I mean, Kyle Whittingham and Utah have a baseline that's way up here. Even if, how in the world do you go 5-7? Now, I know the quarterback situation, I guess, obviously was very unsettled, but still, I thought, to me, Utah has such a great foundation as a program, and Joey McGuire talked about it yesterday, the toughness and how physical Utah is. I mean, he said it. He said when I turn on Utah and watch them on film, he said that's what football is supposed to look like. And so I think that kind of within the building, I think those guys kind of, that message is being conveyed, and I think that I think it's, like I say, I think it's a team that has confidence internally, just because they see themselves kind of what I just described. They recognize that, yeah, we're a talented team. We got a lot of guys here who can play, but we haven't really beaten anybody yet. We haven't been on the road yet, and we're about to go get challenged by a program that is, that's been one of the better, kind of upper tier college football programs for the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Obviously, it's tough in blowout wins, right? And in the level of competition that Texas Tech has faced, and Utah's in a similar situation with this. But where would you see as maybe some potential concerns for this team? Where maybe some of the weaknesses of this team that need to be addressed for them to really have those conference aspirations, or maybe it's playoff aspirations, or whatever that may be?
I think last few years, and this is probably true of most teams that are kind of mediocre but not great, good but not great. They haven't been great in the trenches. They've had solid guys in the trenches, but not big-time guys in the trenches. And again, I think, and that was the case. I think that's been the case. So, and like I say, in the transfer portal, I feel like they addressed that on the defensive line. I think there's still question about on the offensive line, where they're also pretty portal heavy. How's the offensive line going to perform when they're matched up against big time guys across from them. And so it's kind of been, I think, biggest question for them after the first three games is rushing offense. There's been situations where against Kent State last week or a week before game 2, they had a 1st and goal at the 5 and needed 4th and goal from the 1 before they could stick it in the end zone. They ran 4 running plays, and against Kent State, they didn't score until 4th and goal from the 1. I mean, they got stopped because they made 4 yards on 1st down. So a 2nd goal at the 1, then get stoned again, and then finally score the touchdown. And they've had some of that. Their run game has been okay, but not prolific. And I think there's going to be a question of, okay, when you're in 3rd and 2 at Utah or 3rd and 2 against at Arizona State or against Kansas State or BYU, are you going to be able to get that? And I feel like they have a really talented running back, a young man named Jacoby Williams, who is 5'9", 5'10", 180 pounds. I mean, he looks like, kind of fits the definition of a scat back. Mm-hmm. He plays a lot bigger than his size. He played as a true freshman last year, played in all 10 games, or played in all 12 games. And I think he showed his potential. He showed what he was capable of in the bowl game, against Arkansas. Mid-level SEC team, but, SEC talent. And he ran carried it 15 times for 123 yards, and he broke a touchdown for 54 yards. So I think in the future he's going to be a really talented back. But I think that's the biggest question mark for this team after 3 weeks is how effectively can they run the football on a week-in, week-out basis. They kind of, because they're what they were hoping for was to have kind of a 3-man rotation, but the lead guy was going to be Quentin Joyner, who is a transfer from Southern Cal, another portal guy. And in the portal, he could have gone to Ohio State. He chose Tech over Ohio State. He ran for 473 yards as a freshman last year at USC. And then he suffered torn ACL in the second preseason scrimmage in August. So he's out for the year. And so instead of Joyner and Jacoby Williams and Cameron Dickey, all 3 of those guys are sophomores. Now it's just Jacoby Williams and Cameron Dickey. But they don't have the guy that they thought was going to be the big-time guy. So long answer to a short question, but I'd say the run game is kind of the big question with this team right now.
Kind of contrasting that, obviously, you look at every single stat right now, and it's all favorable for Texas Tech. I think you can look, and they're in the top 15 of almost every standard statistic out there, and I'm sure they're just, higher, a little bit lower in some areas, and this is on offense and defense. But looking at just that passing attack with Behren Morton, what has he meant to this program, and do you feel like he's taking the necessary steps to get them? Obviously, you've got talent around him that fits maybe a little bit better than it was the last few years to be able to get them to where they need to be. But is he the guy that can continue to produce in this level and be able to take them to that next level? And kind of what are you seeing from him?
Well, I think so, because, the big storyline, the big question about Behren Morton the last couple of years has been his health, because 2023 Big 12 opener at West Virginia. So basically this time 2 years ago, literally this week, he landed on his shoulder at West Virginia. And as it turned out, you'll find out later, had a grade 3 AC joint tear. And the thing about it was overlooked in the immediate aftermath, because it was the same game that Tyler Shuck suffered a nasty lower leg fracture that you saw on TV, and that doesn't look good. And so the storyline coming out of that game was Texas Tech has lost Tyler Shuck, broken leg. And so you didn't even, kind of really realize until after the fact, and he went back and rewatched the game, that, oh, okay, there's where Behren Morton, as it turns out, also suffered a significant injury the same day. And so he played through it the entire 2023 season went and saw some of the top orthopedic surgeon guys, and they said, okay, you don't really want to, let's see if it heals on its own, because you don't really want surgery on this injury except as a last resort. So he did not get surgery after the 2020. He played with it the rest of the 23 season. He did not get surgery after the 23 season. Again, we're talking Keith Meister, team physician of the Texas Rangers, Neil Elitrosh, who's worked on all sorts of big-time pro guys out in L.A., and they didn't counsel him to get surgery. So he played the entire 24 season. Same thing with this injury. He played all 12 games, all 12 regular season games last year. And then he went and got it fixed in December last year, sat out the bowl game. He says that that he's been better, he just used the term, up top than he's been, in a long time. And so, he looks good, can make all the throws. And, the thing about him is even being kind of compromised, he still was top 20 in the nation in yards passing and touchdown passes last year. He threw for 3,300 yards and 27 TDs. So it's not like he was, totally compromised. But he says that, now he feels better, and he's back to kind of the guy that he was when he was a freshman, and impressed people with his potential there. But, I asked him this offseason about how much has it happened that you had people try to get you into the portal? And he said that since he's been here, he said it's happened 5 or 6 times, 5 or 6 different schools that have tried to get him to go, or reps of 5 or 6 different schools have tried to get him to go into the portal. But he's always been a real loyal guy. I mean, his dad coached high school football in West Texas, including right here in town at Lubbock, Monterey. And I did a story on him, 3 years ago, where when he was a little boy, literally like 6 years old, he's wearing a number 6 Graham Harrell jersey. I mean, this is his, being quarterback at Texas Tech that's what he dreamed of. And so he stuck it out in this era of through his injury and having an opportunity to go other places. He's always said that this is where I want to be. And so I think a healthy Bear Morton is capable of getting them where they want to go, particularly, again, given the talent that he has around him, including, I haven't even talked about him yet, the receiving core. I talked about how the defensive line how the defensive line really passes the eyeball test, and these are different guys. Well, so they have some of that in the receiver core too. The guy who is probably most physically impressive maybe is the tight end that they got transferred from Louisiana named Terrence Carter. He's about 6. He's not very tall. He's like 6'2", 248 pounds. So he's not your necessary prototype tight end. But man, when the guy gets the ball in his hands, he's a load. And they had they return wide receiver named Caleb Douglas, who was a transfer from Florida, and wide receiver named Coy Aiken, who's a guy who's been here since his freshman year. And they have 4 or 5 guys who already have double-digit pass receptions.
This game, obviously, it's one game, and it's an important one in the sense that it's a conference game. But in your viewpoint, how important is this game to Texas Tech, especially knowing kind of the reasons they spend all the money, right? Like trying to get to where they need to. How important is this game individually in the scheme of the entire season?
I'd say very. Like I say, again, with the recognition that this is not a team that you expect to just. I don't think they expect to walk into Salt Lake City and win by 3 or 4 touchdowns. I think they know they got a challenge in front of them. But again, with all the money that they spent and all the talent that they've accumulated, this is a year that with really high expectations. And so if they don't get to Big 12 championship, if they don't win 10 games, get to Big 12 championship, they're going to view it as most folks are going to view it as a disappointment. And as why not just spend all this money for? They were 8-5 last year. So if you're 8-5 last year and you're really increasing your budget and pouring more in, then that ought to be worth at least couple more wins, 2-3 more wins, and especially in the era of an expanded college football playoff. Like I said, there's a lot of people who say that needs to be the expectation. If not now, when?
A lot of people will ask, what's your prediction for this game? And I don't personally love those types of things. I don't really care, right? Quite honestly, like what I think or what others think on that. But I guess I want to give kind of like a different side of that. How, in your view, does Texas Tech lose this game on Saturday?
Probably, Devin Dampier being Devin Dampier and, running for 2 touchdowns and throwing for 2 touchdowns, turning the ball over, or maybe just, not kind of rising to the occasion. One of the things about this transfer portal class, for all the attention that it's gotten, is a lot of these guys came from group of 5 programs, or even starting safety Cole Wisniewski came from that great North Dakota State program, the kind of the Alabama of the FCS. And it's funny because Terrence Carter, the tight end that I was just talking about, coming from Louisiana Lafayette, he said on the coach's radio show last week that, I probably hadn't played in front. The biggest crowd I played in front of was like 25,000. When I come out here and there's 60,000 people or close to it, he was like, I admit I was kind of nervous, just with all the excitement, the atmosphere. It's like I hadn't played in that before. And like I say, about half of these, they got 22 guys who transferred in here. About half of those guys are from guys who are, that group of 5 tier, or like I say, even the FCS tier. One of their highly touted offensive linemen came from Illinois State. And so, okay, they've seen it at home where that number of people's cheering for them. Now they're going to go into a road atmosphere that a lot of these guys have never encountered. So are they rattled? You have a lot of guys playing key spots for you, starters and rotation guys that haven't played in a place like Utah before at Rice-Eccles Stadium. And, that I mentioned a moment ago that I was just floored as much as probably you guys were about what the heck happened to the Utes last year, because I remembered that, before they lost the last 4 home games last year, they were 33-2 in the 35 games before that. So, how does Tech lose on Saturday? I think, like I said, I think it's a combination of those factors. Dampier presents something that they haven't really had to deal with yet, and they have turnovers haven't been an issue yet. Barron Morton's only thrown 1 interception. Do they turn the ball over? And like I said, just how do you respond to that environment?
Well, awesome, Don. Thank you so much for your time. Let everybody know where they can follow your stuff if they have interest in reading the Texas Tech stuff.
Our website is LubbockOnline.com, and my Twitter that I link stuff to is at AJ for Avalanche Journal, at AJ_Don Williams. Don Williams, like the old country and western singer.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you out here in Salt Lake City, and looking forward to this fun and entertaining game.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, no problem. All right, that's it.
All right, I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. When are you coming up?
What's your background? Did you go to Utah?
I didn't. I went to Weber State, so it's a school here in Utah, but it wasn't Utah or BYU, which is the prominent ones here. I quite honestly, I didn't even like college sports growing up. I was a big NBA and NFL fan, and took this job, started covering a little bit more college sports, and fell in love with it. It honestly became my passion, and now I don't really love I do love the NFL still, but the NBA I'm not really a fan of as much, and so it's fun. I enjoy it.
You're in the Salt Lake City market, though, right?
Yeah. So we're our headquarters are right there, downtown Salt Lake. So
how long have you lived there?
I've lived here my whole life. Well, most of my whole life. I've been gone for a little bit, but I've lived here most of my time.
Yeah, I was up there for the first time year before last when Tech played at BYU. So I flew into Salt Lake and drove down to Provo.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place.
Exactly. Yes, I agree 100%. I really enjoyed it up there. That's the first time I'd been in the state of Utah.
Well, that's fun. I'm looking forward to get down to Lubbock and seeing the tortillas, and I know that they're fighting against not having him throw that out there. But honestly, like as a fan of college, like I'm excited to kind of see that environment and see how it goes. But I'm trying to remember when Utah goes back to Texas Tech. It's a few years
Yeah,
out.
I'm not sure. Can't remember if it's next year or the year after. I think it's the year after, actually.
I think you're
I want
right.
to say 27.
These matrix gets hard to remember with these things.
Yeah. All righty.
Well,
Well, very
thank
good. I
you.
appreciate it again.
Yeah, no problem. Look forward to seeing you this week.
Okay. I'm actually not.
Oh,
They're
you're
actually
not
not
coming.
sending me. Believe
Oh,
it or
okay.
not. That's the state of the newspaper
I
business. We
hate
had
it.
never been. I don't think we had ever not been at a Texas Tech football game until last year, and now we're under the Gannett
Oh
banner, and
man.
so I'm not going to. They're not traveling us to Utah or to West Virginia, which is regular season finale.
Oh man, that's frustrating. This would be the game to come to for sure.
Oh yeah, I agree. Like I say, I've never not traveled to a Texas Tech football game until literally last year is when they're just like, okay, we can't go to all the games. So
Man, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm waiting for that day, honestly. Like I every day there's always a pinch and I feel like it's gonna happen sometime.
yeah.
All right,
All right,
well,
man.
enjoy it in Lubbock then.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, have a good one.